This is Bob Barr bringing you another edition of Liberty Guard's Bob Barr's Laws of the Universe. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to follow Liberty Guard on social media. The Liberty Guard Bob Barr's Laws of the Universe that we're going to be talking about today is law number 40, if you're keeping a list of these laws. Law number 40 tells us that government always has a good reason for doing what it shouldn't. In this case, the House of Representatives has just passed a piece of legislation that the government says is really good because it will help track vaccinations and people who have been vaccinated against COVID and be able to very nicely remind them when they're due for another one, at least in the government's mind. So the government has passed this thing that they call the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act. Notice the word infrastructure here. That's the new sort of word of the week. We had the infrastructure bill that was passed recently. Well, I guess the proponents of this particular piece of COVID vaccination legislation decided that throwing the word infrastructure in, even though it has nothing to do with infrastructure in the common or reasonable sense of the term, would improve chances for passage. And apparently it did in the House. This bill passed in the House. H.R. 550, the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act. Interestingly, though, it passed not just with every Democrat voting for it, but 80, count them, 80 Republicans voted for this bill. Now, many of those who didn't vote for it because they believe that the legislation will create a federal vaccination database. Well, some of the Republicans who voted for the bill got very upset by this. Dan Crenshaw sends out a tweet, I think it was, blasting fellow Republicans for lying about the reason why they voted against the bill.
Okay, real talk. Time to debunk some lies from our own side this time. So this one's about the vaccine database that you keep hearing about. Like, that's what got voted on in Congress, and people are mad because some Republicans voted for it, some didn't. All right, here's the truth on it. Every Republican up here, by the way, knows that that particular bill, which was Republican-led, actually makes it harder to track vaccine information on the individual level. It actually decreases the amount of money that was originally allocated for these systems by the Biden administration. So let's back up. Let me tell you the full story. There are something called immunization information systems at every state. These have long existed. In the American Rescue Plan, passed entirely by Democrats, no Republicans voted for it, they added about $500 million to that system and told states to, quote, make them better, right? They didn't put any guardrails. They didn't put any details. They just said, make them better. Now, this worried Republicans because we're worried about these authoritarian blue state governors that indeed do want to track your data and do want to employ vaccine mandates and passports and the such. And so there was a Republican-led effort for this exact provision to decrease the funding for it and ensure that if states take that money, they have to make the data anonymous and only collect it at the population level so that you can't be tracked. So the Republicans screaming about this bill, saying it's bad, it does the exact opposite of what they're saying. And they know that, but they also don't like explaining votes to you. That's the truth.
He gets all huffy and says it's a lie to claim that this piece of legislation creates a federal database of vaccination information. It does, in Dan Crenshaw's view, strengthen the ability or weakens the ability of the government to collect data on vaccinations and use it. Well, it's a distinction without a difference. The legislation, the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act, does what government the federal government loves to do. They say we'll give states and local governments grants for modernizing and updating and expanding their databases for vaccinations. Well, and then what does the federal government get in return? Well, they get all that information. Now, Dan Crenshaw says, well, but it doesn't specifically identify an individual, so it really doesn't create a federal database. Well, that may be, a very strict reading of it or a very strict definition of a database, but the fact of the matter is, in real life, and we've seen this over and over again, when the federal government gives money to state and local governments to collect information and then be able to share it with the federal government, even if it is purportedly designed or configured so that individuals are not, strictly speaking, identified, it is very easy, demonstrably easy for companies and government agencies that know how to manipulate data, and there are a lot of them, to figure out who the data belongs to. So, this notion that, well, it doesn't create a new federal database, quotes, may be true, but in reality, it does. This bill does significantly expand the federal government's ability to gather information from state and local governments on COVID vaccination and to be able to use that for all manner of activities and data use. We don't know. So this bill, the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act, which government says is really important to help track COVID immunizations and to remind people when they need one, has a very good reason in the government's mind for doing it. And even 80 Republicans apparently agree with that. But the government shouldn't be doing this. And this does create a very real world privacy problem in an area that is personal health decisions that should be completely off limits to the government. So the bill, H.R. 550, government says it's good. It isn't. And hopefully, real conservatives who have a real concern and understanding about privacy will stop this legislation in the Senate. Rand Paul, I think, will be leading the effort, and we hope to support him and encourage all of you to support opposition to this privacy-invasive piece of legislation, H.R. 550, the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act, which illustrates perfectly Bob Barr's Laws of the Universe, law number 40. Government always has a good reason for doing what it shouldn't. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to your being with us next time for another edition of Liberty Guard's Bob Barr's Laws of the Universe. This is Bob Barr, and I'd like to thank you for having checked out our program here today. We appreciate your support, your participation, and encourage you to go to libertyguard.org to learn more about our programs and also to help support to further individual freedom and fight against government abuse. One of the ways, but not the only way we do this, is through Bob Barr's Laws of the Universe, but through many, many other programs in support of individual liberty and against government abuse. So please remember to join us. Go to libertyguard.org and join us once again for Bob Barr's Laws of the Universe. Thank you.
My name is Matt Strickland. Liberty Guard saved my family business. I spent most of my adult life fighting for my country overseas. When I came home, I became a small business owner and sadly realized that nobody would fight for me. Our state and local government were trying to shut my family business down for good. And that's when I found Liberty Guard. With Liberty Guard's help, we won the battle against government overreach. And now my business is thriving and growing faster than ever.
Stand with Matt and others just like you in the fight against government overreach. Join Liberty Guard today.